Good morning, everyone. If you could take your seats. Look at that. You guys did a good job quieting down. I thought I was going to have to do a call and repeat, but we're good. Good morning. Every day, we lose approximately 116 lives on American roads. That's about the same number of people in this room today. It's also about the size of a mid-sized passenger plane. Imagine if we lived in a world where every day a commercial plane fell out of the sky. That's a reality that far too many people have learned to accept when it comes to traffic fatalities, not to mention the thousands who are injured on roads every day. And for too long, our response has been the same. More enforcement, more stops, more police time spent on problems that were built into the road itself. What that really means is complacency and complicity. Doing the same thing over and over again is foolish and irresponsible. But you're all here today because that's starting to change. I'm thrilled to welcome you to New York City, my home, and also glad you're able to experience it arguably on one of the most perfect days we've had recently. High 60s, sun, the Knicks are in the playoffs, the Yankees are at the top of the league. It's a good time to be in New York. Thank you for whoever whooped in the back. My name is Max Markham. I'm the Executive Director of the Policing Project at NYU Law. We work with communities and policymakers to build trust, to build public safety approaches that protect people, respect rights. Traffic enforcement sits squarely within that mission, and it's why we've been working alongside so many of you to get this right. We're proud to host this convening, something that has been 3 years in the making, in partnership with the Traffic Safety for All Coalition, which we helped launch about a year ago with the ACLU, with VERA, with Center for Policing Equity, and with AAA. Also, a special thanks to Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Philanthropies for their support and faith in us to turn this idea into a reality. And I'll do just only one, but very important shout out and maybe slight embarrassment, and that is to Scarlett Neath. Please wave. She's not waving because she's annoyed that I'm doing this. She didn't put this in my talking points for a reason, but she had this idea 3 years ago and has brought it to life today. And I'm very grateful for her and the many other people at Policing Project and the Traffic Safety for All Coalition who have allowed this to happen today. More thank yous will come tomorrow, but I just wanted to do that one shout out. We built this coalition because for too long we've worked in silos, and we know we can go further together. Who wants to go on a road trip alone, right? It's always better when friends go along with you, as long as I'm on the aux cord, as long as we have a healthy rotation of Beyonce, you know. But in all seriousness, if you're not yet a member of the coalition, we hope you'll join, and you'll hear more about how to do that later today. So a bit of context for the conversations ahead. Traffic stops are the most common form of contact between police and the public. So if we get this right, we're changing the most frequent experience Americans have with law enforcement. In too many cases, these interactions are also the most unnecessary. And for decades, we've allowed the system to drift from its original purpose. Stops for expired tags instead of for drunk driving. Stops for cracked windshields instead of for speeding. Stops used not to improve road safety, but to fish for evidence of unrelated crimes. Those are called pretextual stops. And the evidence against them is unambiguous. They don't make the roads safer. They erode community trust, and they pull police away from the work that actually matters. We have had some real progress. In response to advocacy from many people in this room, in 2024, the federal government ended DDACTS, the data-driven approaches to crime and traffic safety program that was actively incentivizing pretext stops. Before that, in 2022, the federal government also launched the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program, allocating billions of dollars to approaches that prioritize preventative, system-wide measures over reactive, individual-level punishment. And in the wake of George Floyd's murder, dozens of cities and states enacted policies to curb non-safety traffic stops, some changes driven by police leadership themselves. And this is not a fight between public safety and civil rights. It never was. Take Fayetteville, North Carolina, for example. They cut racial disparities in traffic stops by 20% and fatal crashes by 30% at the same time with the same policy changes. Safe streets and fair streets are mutually inclusive, not exclusive. Over the next 2 days, we'll engage in a critical dialogue focused on right-sizing traffic enforcement to better serve both public safety and equity. We'll begin a little bit later today by examining the effectiveness of traditional tactics, specifically diving into policing without pretext to identify how agencies can move beyond pretextual stops and adopt strategies that more effectively address public safety. Our discussions will then turn towards legislative progress, highlighting efforts to decriminalize non-safety stops, weighing specific options for reclassifying offenses, and prioritizing actual road hazards. We'll address the age-old question, what does the evidence say? In workshops after lunch, we'll map a comprehensive research agenda that identifies innovative data sources and methodologies to track the impact of these changes. And we'll close today by focusing on the evolving role of local leaders in modernizing enforcement through preventative street safety measures and administrative solutions. Tomorrow, day 2, our focus shifts to the future of civilianization, discussing how to overcome legislative barriers to allow non-police entities to handle parking and crash responses. And then we'll conclude our time together with a technology town hall to evaluate the ethics and efficacy of tools like speed cameras and traffic monitoring drones, followed by a vital conversation, one that I'm really looking forward to, on the often overlooked connection between routine traffic stops and immigration enforcement. So I hope you all will stick around for, particularly for those last 2 sessions of tomorrow, which are going to really be fantastic. This convening is about building the shared narrative and policy framework necessary to modernize traffic enforcement across the country. So I want to see and hear who's in the room so we can situate ourselves and make it a little bit interactive to start. So can you raise your hand or give me a shout if you come from the criminal justice world? All right, a little bit of energy. We can do a little better than that. Some of y'all had your coffee, some of y'all didn't. Okay, raise your hand or give me a shout if you come from the road safety world, not mutually exclusive, of course. All right, road safety, even less energy. All right, that's okay. We'll get you guys going. What about public health? All right. She's from LA too, so she's on. It's like 5 a.m. for her. What about law enforcement? Yeah, okay. Government officials and staff? All right, so there's plenty of disciplines here. Many of us have spent our careers in one of those lanes. Today I'm asking you to get out of them because the solutions live at the intersection. I do have the guest list, so I kind of already knew who was here. But I want to get the blood pumping. I'm not a law professor, so I wasn't going to cold call you guys, but you never know. I might change it up. I'll let you in on some of the distances that some people have traveled today. We have folks from downtown, various New York City government folks, from DOT to CCRB to the Mayor's Office of Operations. We have folks from across town, Vera Institute of Justice, ACLU. We have folks from across the river, ACLU of New Jersey. We won't hold that against you. We have people from across a few more rivers, Philadelphia City Council, Maryland Public Defenders, Georgetown. We have folks from upstate, New York State Senate and Attorney General's Office. We have folks on Central and Mountain Time, Overland Park, Kansas, Bloomington, Indiana, Washtenaw County, Michigan, Ramsey County, Minnesota, Salt Lake City, and the Texas Civil Rights Project. And we have folks from the complete other side of the country, Oakland DOT, Catalyst, California, UC Berkeley, LA City Council, City of Phoenix. So I think we did a pretty good job diversifying the room. But just these categories, the ones that I mentioned and the ones that I made you shout out, don't even begin to reflect the full spectrum of professional backgrounds and life experiences captured here today or in our field more broadly. We want this to be interactive. We want you to leave not just with knowledge, but with relationships. The person sitting next to you may be working on the same problem, but from a completely different angle, and that conversation could be the most valuable thing that happens today. And that, my friends, is a pitch to stay for the full day for the reception at the end, because food and alcohol always help stir conversations after a full day of knowledge building. So one piece of housekeeping, maybe the most important part of my remarks, the bathrooms are outside this room to the right of the check-in desk, to the right and behind the check-in desk. Men's are on the left, women's are on the right. Use the bathroom that fits with whatever gender identity or expression you have. And please keep your name tags, because we like to recycle. So with that, I welcome you to NYU. We learn for a living. Let's get to work. And it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce an incredible keynote speaker who can do exactly that, and she's done it to me many times, help us get to work. Deborah Archer is the president of the American Civil Liberties Union, the first person of color to serve in that role in the organization's history of over a century. She is a nationally recognized expert on civil liberties, civil rights, and racial justice. She's also the Margaret B. Hoppin Professor of Law and faculty director of the Community Equity Initiative here at NYU. Deborah is an award-winning teacher and legal scholar. In fact, she was just named one of the most cited legal scholars of 2025, with articles appearing in leading law reviews. Yeah, you can clap for that. You can absolutely clap for that. There's more, so keep the clapping going, right? She's also a national best-selling author. Her book, Dividing Lines: How Transportation Infrastructure Reinforces Racial Inequality, is an essential account of how transportation infrastructure became a means of protecting segregation and inequality after the fall of Jim Crow. If you haven't picked up a copy, most of you have one in your tote bag, and if you don't, you can complain to me afterwards. Prior to full-time teaching, Deborah worked as an attorney at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and as a Karpatkin Fellow at the ACLU, and also previously served as the chair of the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board. We will be here for many more hours if I mentioned all of Deborah's experiences and awards, so I'd rather you hear from her. Please help me welcome our keynote speaker, Deborah.
I thought if I stood up that Max would stop talking, so see how that works. Anyway, thank you for the very generous introduction. As Max said, he was a student of mine many, many years ago, one of my all-time favorites, so it was really a pleasure for him to invite me to be here with you all, and it is good to be with you. You all are my people, although you often do not claim me. And I will say that in the beginning, when Max was asking people to raise their hands where they were from, he never said civil rights attorneys. So just in more proof, and we are the, you see? And we have energy. We had the energy, so it's good to be with you all. I think you're gonna have some really important conversations today. And before you begin, I wanna contribute one idea to your thinking. I think it's one that sits at the heart of my work, and I think that should be at the heart of the conversation that you all are gonna have today. And that is, you know what, let me pause for a second. I'm battling an allergy or a cold or something, and I have a cough drop in my mouth. My mother would be so ashamed. And I just realized as I'm about to start to try to chew it so that you don't see it, that I should acknowledge that, and my apologies. Okay, so the concept that I want to introduce to the conversation that I think is important to my work, and I think it should be important to the conversation that you're having today, is that mobility is freedom. The ability to move, to get to work, to see family, to take your child to school, to gather, to protest, to simply exist in public space. This is all essential to what it means to live as a full member of a democratic society. But in the United States, that freedom has never been equally shared by everyone. From the earliest days of this country, Black mobility has been controlled, it's been surveilled, it's been restricted, it's been penalized, because in America, the freedom to move was never free. Black mobility has always been treated as presumptively suspicious. Much of white supremacy, I think, is about place, convincing Black and brown people and other people of color of their place socially, and then getting them to stay in that place. And what better way to keep people in their place socially than to lock them in their place physically, to limit the places they have access to, the places that they can go to work and to be with friends and family, that will limit who they think they can be and where they fit into this society. And so it's been always a really important part of who we are, convincing us to stay in place and then using all of our resources to lock us in that place. In the antebellum South, Black movement without permission was a crime. It was an existential threat to the slave order, so confining Black people to plantations was essential to the institution of slavery. Then after emancipation, new systems arose, sharecropping, convict leasing, vagrancy laws that tied Black people to place and again penalized their movement. During America's second Reconstruction, the tools of segregation and separation changed. We had redlining, restrictive covenants, urban renewal, but the project remained the same, keeping Black people and other people of color in their place physically, to keep them in their place socially. And it really was no accident that so much of the fight for freedom during America's second Reconstruction played out on the roads, buses, and the bridges. From the Montgomery bus boycott to the Freedom Ride to the march over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, because Black people and other people of color understood that the right to move freely was inseparable from the right to be free, from the right to be a full citizen in this country. So highways and roads and traffic enforcement then became the next chapter in this story. In the 20th century, this is something that I write about in my book, public officials used transportation infrastructure to reinforce white supremacy. So as we saw the victories of the civil rights movement and those invisible tools that we use, and I was just talking about the redlining and restrictive covenants and racial zoning laws, public officials turned to transportation infrastructure as a more durable and more visible way to reinforce segregation. They planned streets and road grids in ways that reinforce segregation, co-opting one-way streets, dead-end roads, turning through streets into cul-de-sacs, all to keep us separate. And then they routed highways through Black neighborhoods, not around them, through them, to destroy them, to remove them, and to become a barrier, protective barrier between Black and white communities. In Hartford, Connecticut, where I'm from, two major highways, I-84 and I-91, cut through the city. They destroyed hundreds of homes in the process. They isolated the predominantly Black and Latino North End. And then they created this physical and psychological barrier that still shapes access to opportunity in that community today. And Hartford, of course, is not unique. Across the country, thriving Black communities from Detroit's Black Bottom to Los Angeles's Sugar Hill were dismantled, families were displaced, wealth was destroyed, and communities were fractured. And of course, these were not accidents. They were intentional policy choices designed to reinforce segregation and racial hierarchy. And I think all of this history matters for your conversation today because traffic enforcement did not emerge from a neutral starting point. It emerged from a landscape that had already been shaped physically and legally to control where Black people could go, how they could move, and what happened to them when they moved in the wrong way. So when we talk about traffic enforcement, when you talk about right-sizing enforcement, we are talking about power. We're talking about belonging. We're talking about who is allowed to move freely, who is allowed to feel like they belong, who has access to all the benefits and rights that living in this country promises to us. Everyone in this room I know already knows that traffic stops have been the site of racial violence and oppression for a long time. You all know Philando Castile was pulled over for a broken taillight in 2016 in the St. Paul suburb. He was shot and killed by a police officer. We know that Philando Castile had been stopped by police 49 times before that day, 49 times, for a broken taillight, for expired registration. In 2023, we all heard about Tyree Nichols, who was beaten to death by Memphis police officers following a traffic stop. And there are so many others whose names I will not go through today, but we all remember their stories. But it's also not only drivers, and I want to highlight that for you all. In August 2014, Michael Brown and a friend were walking in the road in Ferguson, Missouri. A police officer drove by and ordered them to get on the sidewalk and was going to ticket them for walking in the street. That encounter escalated and Michael Brown was shot and killed. And here's what you need to know about that order to use the sidewalk that often isn't spoken about. That Ferguson, Missouri had no functioning sidewalks to walk on. It was a community where for decades, community organizers and advocates and residents had been demanding more investment in pedestrian infrastructure because you could not navigate the community. They could not navigate their own community on foot. Of the city's $21 million budget that year, $3,000, just $3,000 went to sidewalk construction and maintenance. So the sidewalks were cracked, they were disconnected, they disappeared into the grass. You had a little piece of sidewalk and then no sidewalk for a mile and then another little piece of sidewalk. So people walked in the road because there was nowhere else to walk. And rather than respond to this disinvestment with investment, the folks in Ferguson did what we see across the country. No investment, and instead we're going to engage in policing and punishment. So I'm not going to give you sidewalks, but we are going to engage in the over-enforcement of pedestrian infrastructure laws. The Department of Justice found that Ferguson police enforced pedestrian laws almost exclusively against Black residents and as part of a deliberate practice of using fines and fees to extract revenue from the Black community to fill budget holes. In the 2 years before Michael Brown was killed for walking in the street, Black people accounted for 95% of the charges for walking in the road. And Ferguson is not an isolated case. It's a part of a pattern. In New York City, 90% of jaywalking tickets issued in 2019 went to Black and Latino residents. And together, Black and Latino residents in that year only made up 55% of the population, but 90% of the jaywalking tickets. In Jacksonville, Florida, Black residents received 55% of jaywalking tickets, while comprising just 29% of the population. In Champaign-Urbana, 90% of jaywalking arrests were Black. In Sacramento, almost 50% of pedestrian citations went to Black residents in a city that is just 13% Black. And every one of those cities has the same story underneath the statistics. Disinvestment in pedestrian infrastructure in Black neighborhoods, followed by aggressive enforcement of pedestrian laws in those same neighborhoods. So the same city that fails to provide the sidewalks and build the sidewalks and maintain the sidewalks then sends an officer to penalize you for walking without one. So enforcement fills the void left by disinvestment rather than filling it with investment. So in this context, what does right-sizing traffic enforcement actually mean? I want to offer 3 principles I hope you will find interesting and add it to your thinking as you listen to the discussions, engage in the conversation, and drink the alcohol and food at the reception this afternoon. So in this context, I think enforcement without investment is punishment. You cannot right-size traffic enforcement without simultaneously right-sizing the infrastructure that it enforces. The answer to pedestrian safety in communities with no sidewalks is not more citations, it is sidewalks. An answer to safety on our roads is not more tickets. It is roads and street grids designed to serve the people who live in those communities, not the goals of segregation and separation that shaped so many of them. I know that I'm supposed to be tight on time and focused, but that just reminds me of a story of a community in California that the ACLU of Southern California worked with and I've spent some time with. They had a major roadway going through their community, losing lots of neighbors and loved ones and family members on that road because people were just racing down the street with no regard for the people who lived in that community, right? So we put these major roads through communities and not really enough thought to think about how the people who live there would navigate. So they wanted to be safe. They wanted them to stop losing the lives of loved ones. They did not want to invite more enforcement. They did not want to penalize the people who live there. So they didn't want stop signs and traffic lights because they know that would result in enforcement. But what they learned was that people also slow down if you plant trees. That people will also slow down if there are plants along the roadway, if there are seats along the roadway. And so with the help of a collection of organizations, they were able to get safer roads, a safer community, without bringing in tools that would further penalize their community. So we need to think about how we are building that infrastructure and building it in a way that allows communities to thrive, that moves us away from this idea of enforcement. Because any discussion of civilianizing enforcement, of decriminalizing non-safety stops, or reimagining police contact has to be paired with a serious commitment to investing in the communities that have been most over-enforced and most underserved. Second is a reminder, and I know it's a reminder, that technology does not neutralize racism. I want to tell you about Beaver Creek, Ohio. When the Regional Transit Authority there sought to extend a bus route from the majority Black Dayton into this predominantly white suburb city so that folks could get to the mall there for work, to shop, to do whatever they wanted to do in the mall, city officials sought to impose 19 truly extraordinary new requirements. One not related to what you're doing today is that they said if they had bus stops in Beaver Creek that every bus stop had to be fully heated and fully air conditioned. At that point, the only fully air-conditioned bus stop in the world was in Dubai. And right, so it really wasn't about the comfort of bus riders. It was something else going on, and you could see what the other thing was when they named the other requirement, which was 24-hour real-time surveillance cameras transmitting directly to the Beaver Creek Police Department. And the message was explicit that Black and brown transit riders require surveillance. So as you discuss automated license plate readers or traffic cameras and AI-driven enforcement, you have to ask whose movements are being tracked, whose infractions are being captured. Technology deployed in an unequal landscape does not produce equal outcomes. And finally, third, revenue extraction has to end. Ferguson is not unique. Across the country, traffic and pedestrian fines function as municipal revenue tools, extracting money disproportionately from Black and brown and low-income communities. So any right-sizing agenda that does not explicitly decouple enforcement from revenue generation will simply reproduce the same extractive dynamic, whether those citations are issued by a police officer or by a civilian. So that is what I want to leave you with. Right-sizing traffic enforcement is not just about reducing bad stops, though that does matter. It's not just about deploying civilians instead of officers, though I believe that would help. It's about recognizing that for too many Black people and other people of color, a traffic stop is not a safety interaction. It is a confrontation with the accumulated weight of a system that was never designed for their safety and inclusion. A system built on the premise that Black mobility is dangerous, Black presence is suspicious, and Black lives are expendable. That is the work here, not just to reduce the harm of the system, but to build a system that we owe to each other. There is a powerful image that I often return to when I'm thinking about the interaction of transportation infrastructure and inequality. In 2020, after the murder of George Floyd, protesters across the country took to the streets and to the highways and to the bridges. In St. Paul, they marched on Interstate I-94, a highway that destroyed the city's largest Black community decades earlier. In Memphis, they marched on I-40, a highway that was built to divide a Black and white community. In Little Rock, they marched on I-630. They took over the very infrastructure that had once displaced them and used it to demand justice. To me, those moments captured something profound. People were not just protesting policing. They were protesting the systems and structures that made policing and punishment inevitable. So as we think about right-sizing traffic enforcement, the question is simply not how to better enforce. The question is, what would it look like to build a whole system where safety does not depend on enforcement at all? A system where mobility is truly a right, access to opportunity is not determined by where you live, and no one is treated as suspicious simply for existing in their own community. Because in the end, transportation has always been about more than movement. It has been about who belongs. And if we are serious about building a multiracial democracy rooted in dignity, equity, and justice, then we have to ensure that everyone has the freedom to move through it safely, fully, and without fear. So thank you for engaging in this conversation and for listening to me and for reading my book.